from the article recently published by Philip Murphy and widely advertised in the bourgeois press. It is a sign of the times. There is obviously going on in all thinking heads and examinations of the present and preparation for the pregnant future which lies ahead. In the New International of November 1943, some attempts was made in an article entitled, quote, "The American Tradition," to outline the special national characteristics of American proletariat as evinced in its history up to the organization of the CIO. The following article proposes to continue the analysis. It will attempt, one, to trace the growth of social and class consciousness in the American proletariat from 1929 to the present day. Two, to observe the manifestation of this growth in the programs and pronouncements of the leadership. Three, to place this relationship and its probable development in its historical and international settings. Four, to reaffirm some practical conclusions in the light of the above. The most striking development of the Great Depression of 1929 is a profound skepticism of the future of contemporary societies among large sections of the American people. It is mostly easily recognized in the widespread fear, if not conviction, of a tremendous and inevitable depression. After the post-war, the most concrete reaction of the proletariat to the breakdown of 1929 was the organization of the CIO, one of the greatest and most significant chapters in the history of labor, anywhere at any period. And any estimate of the working class in action during the coming period must base itself upon that colossal energy of the American masses, which have the driving force of the CIO, labor in Europe and in the United States. The late development of the mass industrial organization in the United States has both itself as the originator, initiator, and organizer of these developments. Thus, whereas in Europe, the winning of these advantages fortified the class consciousness learned in the industrial struggles, in the United States, all this gain seemed to fortify the ascendancy of one's political organization of the bourgeoisie over the working class. In reality, okay, hold on. Come on. Okay. In reality, this is only half the truth. The lesser half, organized labor in America, insofar as it supported and still supported Roosevelt, did so in a manner far more class conscious than otherwise. It considered the New Deal as essentially a New Deal for the working people. To the great masses of the people, Rockefeller, Morgan, and Wall Street, the rich did not need any New Deal. They were getting on well enough, and was the starving third. It was the starving third of the nation that wanted it, and whoever inwardly the New Deal administration might have been, in fact, it handed out copiously to the workers in words. While this inhabited the emergency of the National Political Party of Organized Labor, it has had inevitable and profound consequences in the working class. It has developed a conviction that unemployment and social suffering are no longer questioned between the industrial worker and the private capitalist. The working class, by and large, believes that society is responsible. By society, it means the government, and it looks to the government to take whatever measures are necessary to repair what has become an intolerable state of affairs. How rapidly this sentiment has spread has its most eloquent testimony in the vigorous response of the bourgeoisie. The freshness, formidable militancy, and confident expectations of the American proletariat gave it a powerful, fully organized by the state. In 1936, the highly developed political organizations and political experience of the French proletariat could force from the French bourgeoisie less than the purely industrial actions of the proletariat of America from the American bourgeoisie. The greater wealth of the country, the national traditions of plenty, both of them complementary sides of the special American tradition, played and will continue to play a powerful role. In 1939, the National Resource Board reported to the president as follows on the basic characteristics of American economy. Moreover, as people become increasingly aware of the discrepancies between the rich resources and the poor results in the living, and as the ineffectiveness of the organizations of resources become more clear, a sense of social frustration must develop and be reflected in a justified social unrest and unavoidable friction. Individual frustrations build into social frustration, and social frustration is quite as likely to work itself out of socially destructive as in socially constructive ways. The opportunity for a higher standard of living is so great, the social frustration from the failure to obtain it is so real, that other means will undoubtedly be sought if a democratic solution is not worked out. The time for finding such a solution is not unlimited. Such was a brief but exact representation of the complex social relations in the United States of America in 1939, and all the more convincing because the source of the circumstances from which it comes, the influence of the war. Oh, we'll try to get you some, Yusuf, but I don't know if we can. Have anything? I don't have anything, I don't think. No coins. We'll try to get you some, Yusuf, we'll see. The influence of the war. The influence of the war was merely accentuated these developments, which were already so powerful in the decades before its outbreak. And if, as is inevitable in war, their full fruition has been slowed down, the result must be their outburst with renewed force at some stage in the coming period. To begin with, the war was prepared, has prepared the population for social crises to a degree that was impossible to avoid, set by the state organization of their economy. By the millions of men have been torn from their homes and passed through the military machine. By the millions, and more backward elements have been dragged from rural stagnation, women from their homes, and petty bourgeoisie from offices, and hurled into the discipline of large-scale capitalist production. Never has there been such an uprooting in American life. The country was undergone a profound social upheaval, the greatest the proletariat has ever known. Not only was the war disrupt normal existence to this unprecedented degree, side by side with this, it has compelled a growing consciousness among all ranks of the proletariat that production is a social process in which labor has both rights and responsibilities. In 1929, in the minds of the workers, organized labor was a small section of the population. The capitalists were another, and government a third. Three different types of entities. The breakdown of the system of the, quote, free enterprise in 1929 resulted in the steady growth of social and class consciousness. By 1939, quote, free enterprise had distinguished itself as management in order to emphasize its social role in production. Organized labor now looked upon itself as entitled to a voice in the management of the productive process, and looked to government as the responsible mediator in conflicting social claims. Already, however, by 1940, it was shown by the Ruther Plan of UAW, one of labor's most advanced sections, opposed itself to management as a candidate for the organization of production in the interest of society as a whole. The last 3 years have seen truly astonishing development of the social consciousness of organized labor. This development of social consciousness has been as powerful as it is because of the special role of the state. Directly and indirectly, the government has interfered in the controlled every aspect of economic and social life, from wages, working conditions, food, and clothing, and clothes, to the date of the conception of children. and in the army, even the right to marry. And after World War I, the resentment of the working class against all that it had to suffer was directed more against Morgan, Wall Street, and private capital than the government. In World War II, the hostility of the exacerbation resulted from the stratification of the economy, and the strain of the war have been directed as much against the government as against private capital. The course of the miners' strike, undertaken against the full power of bourgeois society and its state during wartime, shows how deep is the current dissatisfaction among the workers with the existing states of affair and their consciousness of the center of responsibility and, of course, of visibility. Hold on. Let me appeal so hard. Asha, I'm not gonna bring you. Well, I guess there's 200 coins. I'll let you dictate that. Okay. The government. Oh my gosh! Stop! Stop doing shit! Stop! What the hell happened? All right, I lost where I was at. The government. The government recognized this earlier and was not spared its efforts to counteract the deep anti-war feelings, the skepticism which was the aftermath of World War II, and the suffering of the people during the Depression. Through its highest officials, the president and the vice president, it was stimulated. It has stimulated the masses by vague but constantly reiterated promises in repayment for the sacrifice of the war, by the abolition of what the workers endured in the pre-war period. The culminating features of the whole experience, however, while it permeates the consciousness of the great masses of the people, is as yet being held, as it were, in solution. But it will break forth with irresistible force as soon as the masses feel upon them the inevitable pressure of capitalist bureaucracy. To the many millioned masses already skeptical of, quote, free enterprises, the war effort of the state indicates that the government, by planned use of American productive systems, can create a social society of full employment and plenty for all. All the present the proletariat is in a state of sullen suspiciousness towards the capitalist class in general and the Roosevelt government in particular. Like the bourgeoisie, it confidently expects that the war, at least in Europe, is near enough to its conclusion to justify intensive preparations for the post-war period. The end of this phase of the war can be the signal for the outbreak of the sharpest class struggle. It may even be possible for the bourgeoisie to suppress them before the actual end of hostilities in Europe. It is not impossible that the break with Roosevelt may come before the 1944 election. Such events are quite unpredictable. The decisive question, however, is that although contradictory currents move among the working class, yet as a whole, it knows what it wants, and in millions, it is in its advanced groups, is determined to have it. It is conscious of great changes ahead in society, both at home and abroad. And it knows that labor is destined to play a greater part in these changes. Such at least is the opinion of the present writer, the labor leadership. Hey, welcome. One of the surest signs of the estimated changes of the consciousness of the American proletariat is to be found in the character of the demands now being put forward by the leadership. Let us take three of them. William Green of the AFL has frequently expressed himself as being hostile to government interference in industry. He accepted it as a war measure, but fundamentally class collaborationist that he is. He claims that free political institutions must be based upon free enterprise, permanent government control of industry. According to Green, means permanent government control of labor. Where there, Mr. Green is perfectly right within his own limitations, which are the limitations of capitalist society. If the capitalist governments organize industry, then modern production, being that it is compelled to organize labor as well. For the capitalist, the organization of labor is merely a phrase for the control, the limitations, and the ultimate suppression of the rights of organized labor. The solution, obviously, is the organization of industry by the working class itself. However, even a Green cannot be blind to the inexorable tendencies which are working themselves out in the process of production today. And on December 3rd, 1943, in an interview in Washington, Green reorganized that the post-war reconversion programs will inevitably be guided by the government. Green has discovered a new, quote, friend of labor, no less a person than a discredited Donald Nelson, who proposed Nelson as a leader of a, quote, top policy council in which Congress, management, labor, and farmers would be represented. Thus, even in the mind of this most backward-minded labor leader, it is perfectly clear that the old days of free enterprise are gone. For the time being, the production of a social process for which government is responsible. More important, however, is the frank recognition that labor must actually be represented in the production council of the nation. The old maneuvering, the intrigue, and the barter of the corridors of Washington, which go under the name of lobbying. This is no longer sufficient. Labor must take its own place in the council of government. And the second example that we propose to take is the post-war program of the UAW. This program based itself on international corporations. Organized labor of all United Nations must cooperate to assure the application of the principles of the Atlantic Charter and to establish a worldwide system of collective security, eliminating trade barriers and establishing minimum labor standards in all lands. The immediate question is that of reconversion. Speediest reconversion for peacetime production must be carried out with maintenance of labor standards and job protection for workers who have transferred to war work. Returning members of the armed services must be granted jobs, bonuses, education, and protection for dependents. The aim is full protection and full employment. The government must operate monopolies and regulate other industries to guarantee full employment and production in the public interest. Small business must be rehabilitated. The gigantic construction program must be inaugurated by the federal government. Farm production must be geared to the economy of abundance, with elimination of absentee control and market insecurities. Health, education, and security. A nationwide program must eradicate disease and malnutrition. Education must be equally available to all, and full Social Security must be granted from cradle to grave. The means is the necessary climax to such a program. Democratic planning for peacetime economy is only possible with full participation of organized leaders at all levels. Murray's Manifesto. Infinitely more important, however, is the pronouncement recently made by Philip Murray, extracts from which stands at the head of his article. It is obviously a kind of New Year manifesto. We reprint some of its more important passages. Events have convinced us that labor must become a more influential factor in the future than it has been in the past. For the first time in American history, the forces of labor are now setting up a nationwide organization to protect the rights of the working man, as well as the rights for the returning soldiers, the farmers, and small businessmen. and so-called common man. This is not a Labor Party or a third party. There is no present intention to form such a party. This is something new in American politics. We are impelled to action by the happenings of the last year or two, by the growing reactionary trend, and by the critical prospect raised by the election of 1944 and the eventual reversion to the peacetime economy. Public apathy allows ignorant, selfish, and short-sighted men to get into Congress. It makes us dread to think what might happen if such men should be in control when the terrific problems of the war arise. It has been, and it was bad enough last time. This time, with a far greater war on our hands, and consequently with far greater problems to converting back to peace, such reckless courses might shake the foundation of the very democratic system we have been fighting for. We believe that the years immediately ahead are the most critical we have ever faced, the years of decision, when new patterns will be formed. Having helped to conquer tyranny abroad, the United States in peace must conquer unemployment and poverty at home. We have proved in war that this nation can produce a Nigerian of armaments and materials. Disaster comes by accident, but prosperity today comes by planning. In man's long history, there come short periods of time which profoundly influence his way of life for centuries thereafter. We are living in such a period today. No one knows to what extent a democracy can plan its future in advance. We shall draw up the present. We should draw up and present to the American people a specific set of principles for the general welfare. One thing immediately stands out. Murray is under no illusion whatever as to the easy transition in the United States to the world of the four freedoms of the century of the common man. He is aware, on the one hand, and of the tremendous capacity for planning production in America, which has been demonstrated to the masses. He is equally aware of the determination of the bourgeoisie to wreck the democratic systems, if need be, and to maintain its power and privileges at whatever cost to the nation. A deeper fear for the future can be discerned in this serious analysis addressed to American people as a whole. Yet this labor leader omits what everyone knows to be one of the fundamental constituents of the, quote, years of decisions. He omits all references to the independent action of the working masses. He omits it because, like all his kind, he is afraid of it. The ideological fig leaf of reformism of this type is that even if the labor leadership is aware of the perils ahead, the workers are so backward that it is impossible to take the drastic measures necessary for the radical working class resolution of the crises. As we follow Murray, and look into the future, the first thing to do is to destroy this illusion of advanced labor leaders and backward workers. One second. Estimates as to what the particular stages of development reached by the working class will always differ widely. Precision on such a question, difficult at all times, is particularly difficult when the working class in question has no independent political organization of its own, carrying on a specific political education, and in turn acting as a barometer of working class development. But even where, as formerly for years in Europe, what difficulties did not exist, the extent to which social ideas or programs have penetrated into the minds of the workers cannot possibly be told until the workers take action, and mass action in which they feel their united strength. When the French proletariat moved into the factories in June 1936, only the events themselves showed how far the workers were cautiously permitted with distrust of the ruling regime and a deep determination to ensure that their demands were carried out. Yet on the surface, it could appear that if only the workers saw as clearly into the future as Murray and the leaders of the UAW, when it would be possible for labor to begin now, to make great efforts and achieve great progress on its own behalf. This is proved by the fact that the American working class has not yet felt the necessity of the independent political organization of its own. Until then, we must wait until the workers are more educated. In reality, such an estimate, true on the surface, is fundamentally false. The whole course of the development of labor in Europe and Asia, the history of the CIO in America, shows that labor leadership at the decisive moment is always lagging behind the working class. We have to see this to the end. To see into the future, however, and visualize trends of social classes and groups require first and foremost a clear concept of the past. The American proletariat has its own national characteristics. In a previous article, we tried to indicate these by a rough comparison with the development of the proletariat in Great Britain. But the American proletariat is a part of the international working class. We can see best into its future by some comparison with the growth and distinct stages of the developing proletarian struggle. Stages of the proletarian struggle. Whoever is okay. The international proletariat first appeared on the scene in the early 1930s, and its first great action was the French Revolution of 1848. Since that time, every great individual action of the proletariat has marked a stage in the development of the proletariat as a whole. Engels has outlined this movement for us in his introduction to Marx, Civil War in France. He notes that, I need to read that one too. He notes that the workers of 1948 themselves designated the Republic, which followed Louis Philippe, as a socialist republic. Yet, as to what was to be understood by this socialist republic, nobody was quite clear, not even the workmen themselves. Hello. In 1871 came the Paris Commune. There we had much of the confusion which existed in 1948. Lenin, who followed Marx and Engels very closely, notes that, quote, there was no workers' party, there was no preparedness, and no long training of the working class, which in the mass did not even clearly visualize its task and the methods of fulfilling them. There were no serious political organizations of the proletariat, no strong trade unions or cooperative societies. On another occasion, speaking to the 7th Congress of the Russian Communist Party, he gave a belligerent interpretation to the original idea expressed by Engels in the above-mentioned introduction. The Commune was not understood by those who had created it. They created it with the instinctive genius of the awakening masses, and not a single fraction of the French socialists realized what they were doing. Was the immediate object of the Commune a complete socialist revolution? Quote, we can cherish no such illusion. Lenin says that when Engels called the Commune a dictatorship of the proletariat, he had in view, quote, only the participation and moreover the ideological leading participation of the representatives of the proletariat in the revolutionary government of Paris. This lack of consciousness in its revolutionary leadership helped to ruin the Commune apart from the objective difficulties. Yet the progress from 1848 was immense. Europe was then quiet for nearly 35 years. In 1905, Russian proletariat took the advanced position. It established a general political strike. It's one of the greatest weapons of the proletariat in its struggle against capital. For out of its own instinctive response to the objective development of capitalist production, it organized the Soviets. The international significance of this for the proletariat was soon seen. When the end of World War I brought to the head the gathering crises of capitalism all over Europe, the general political strike and the organizations of the Soviet became fundamental weapons of the proletariat in the revolutionary struggle. In backward China in 1925 to 1927 would see the same phenomenon. The year 1936 is a very important one in the history of the proletarian struggle. Workers developed a new weapon corresponding to the high stage of the struggle within the capitalist class. In France, they go into factories and threaten to stay there until they're satisfied. In Spain, in Catalonia, the first thing the workers did is to take hold of the property of the bourgeoisie. Never was a proletarian revolution so violent and decisive in this respect as was the revolution in this most important province of Spain in the first 72 hours. He had there existed a Spain anything like a revolutionary party, proletariat would have been able to consolidate itself over large areas in Spain, even more rapidly than the extraordinarily rapid revolution in Russia between February and October 1917. What we have to note is that in America, the proletariat, though far less conscious politically and far less aroused than the proletariat either in France or in Spain, used precisely the same basic method of struggle. It went into the factories. John L. Lewis, the militant labor leader, fought splendidly for the CIO. But the American working class, once it was aroused, showed itself ready to adopt the most advanced methods of proletarian struggle current at the time. At a decisive moment, these apparently backward workers were far in advance of their most advanced leaders. The lesson to be drawn from this is plain. When the American proletariat, as we confidently expect it does move into action, it will take steps which will correspond to the general stage of development of the proletariat class struggle at the time. The Murrays and Thomases and the Rutherfords will be found at the tail of the mass movement. So it always has been. So it always will be. We agree entirely with Murray as to the fateful character of the years ahead. We only add our confidence that the American proletariat will show in the moment of action that all of its present leaders are bumbling behind it. Reaffirmation of practical conclusions. Interesting. I don't know about now. Now it's changed. This is back during after World War I, World War II. So it's changed now. Certain practical conclusions can now be affirmed. 1. The propaganda and agitation of the Labor Party, which revolutionists will advance. Do you think China will ever achieve true communism, or are they really trying to get to it? I don't know. They do imperialism and stuff like that. They hold to capitalist relations and shit like that. So I think they're state capitalists. I don't know. We'll see. 1. The propaganda and agitation for the Labor Party, which revolutionists will advance, must serve first and foremost as a means of educating the working class to the perils of the hours and fatefulness of the days ahead, and the need of drastic solutions to the social problems presented. Wherever the workers wish to form an independent labor party, the revolutionists today support them and actively cooperate. But the revolutionary program for a labor party goes far beyond what appears to be the immediate political consciousness of millions of workers. If our previous experience proves anything, it is that the explosive forces which are gathered in the working class movement during the past 10 years will drive it forward at the moment of decision far beyond the imagination of Murray and his brother bureaucrats. It can conceivably happen that the workers may face a very sharp stage of the class struggle even before the independent labor party is formed. A genuine mass labor party may be stifled, as Murray obviously intends to stifle it for 1944. The crises may unloose the torrential movement for the independent party, Labor Party. Such things do not concern us here, and in any case are unpredictable. Unpredictable. But the revolutionists, under all circumstances, hold before the workers a program for the reconstruction of society. The American working class has not suffered the destruction of the American economy by war. It is outside the international complications of the European proletariat. It has had hammered into its head from all sides the corrupt origins of fundamental bureaucracy and fascism. It has learned a great deal both on the national and international scale from the intensive political education which war brings and the fortunate position in which it has been placed in relation to the actual conflict. It has suffered none of the drastic blows which have fallen upon the European proletariat during recent years. It is conscious that its great battles are before it. Any kind of political analysis which thinks that the bold political program is to, quote, advanced for the backward workers completely misunderstands that sharp transposition of roles between masses and the labor bureaucrats. At the moment that the masses move in action, and in the United States in 1944, to talk about, quote, years of decisions. Without visualizing mass action to the escapist fantasies of the frightened bureaucrat. 2. The second practical conclusion is the recognition of the necessity of a revolutionary Marxian party today. A Marxian party is always necessary, but a frank recognition of struggle or the organization of an independent labor party does not in the least mean subordination of the struggle for a revolutionary party. Exactly the opposite is the case. It is clear from Murray's article that the labor bureaucracy, which he represents, does not see labor's participation in the years of decision, except as given its votes to be used at the dictates of its leaders. Any illusion about the labor bureaucracy on this score will be paid for the heavy cost. Will be paid for a heavy cost. The labor bureaucracy is a social phenomenon with certain social and political characteristics. That it does not wish a labor party is not in any way surprising. Tomorrow it may or may not be the same opinion. But even if a dynamic development should push the cast of Murray, Green, and the rest of them, and others of their type into leadership of an independent labor party, then these gentlemen will do substantially what all their colleagues in Europe have been doing for the past 50 years. They will try to use the party as an instrument of class collaboration and suppression of working class militancy. The more powerful is the urge of the masses to come to grips with their oppressors, and more certainly will our labor statesmen maneuver to suppress the workers. The struggle, therefore, for the as yet unborn Labor Party, and the struggle to make the Labor Party, if and when formed, an instrument for the organization and education of the workers. What that is a task that will have to be performed against the labor bureaucracy. In other words, it is a task of the Revolutionary Party. Finally, when we watch the horizon of Europe, Asia, and Africa, and see the vast explosion of class struggle which impend, it becomes clear that the American working class needs its Revolutionary Party, not only to assist in its struggles with the quaking bureaucrats, but lead it only to stifle its growing aspirations for independence. It needs such a party to help to draw the lessons of the great international class battles ahead, so that these lessons can be applied to the national field. January 1944. Chapter 12. American People in One World. The essay of dialectical materialism. Okay, so American people in, quote, one world. an essay in Dialectical Materialism. America has entered upon a new phase of relationships with the rest of the world. Its armies tramped and roll over the most remote corners of the globe. Its naives scorn and 5 oceans. Every day its airmen blaze new, quote, Santa Fe trails over African jungles and the China Sea. American military and political leaders laid down the law of Casablanca, London, uh, uh, King in Rome, and partition continents in Cairo and Tehran. Arabs, Hindus, and Koreans seek the bread of independence, jostle one another along the stone corridors of the Constituent Avenue, the Constitution Avenue. All of the world has been converted, and Washington is the modern Mecca. Within the White House, Roosevelt aggregates the right to KO rulers of empires, and as a merchant, KOs prospective salesmen. Augusta, Rome, the Pope sitting crowned upon the graves, the graves thereof. Even Imperial Britain seemed to have been merely successive anticipation of this monstrous, this incredible concentration of power. The American people are grappled with the change. The sales of Willikes, One World, the greatest publishing success in history, is a political and not a literary phenomenon. Yet the true nature of the new relations remains obscured for the great masses of the people. How could it be otherwise? Day after day, year after year, it has heard American history past and present discussed in the following terms. It is not a coincidence that the United States and Russia, under the CSRs and under the Soviets, have always in vital matters been on the same side. That for more than 100 years, Britain and America have in the end always found that against the moral enemies of either, they would support one another, and that France, which did so much to liberate America, has twice in her mortal peril found us at last besides her. What? Sorry, I didn't get the first that I didn't get it at first that you are reading. Yeah, you can apply communism to any country, any conditions. Yeah, well, I don't see why you couldn't. We propose to expose the falsities of this interpretation of the American history and its international relations. It is not the truth. It is not the truth about American history, and can be factually exposed. Left unexposed, it affords to fertile a soil for the organized deception of the people as to the true character of American foreign relations of today and still more of tomorrow. We propose, however, to make a preliminary statement to our own principles. First, because the vastness of the subject and the danger of becoming lost in it. Secondly, owing to the necessity of constantly counterposing Marxism to the bourgeoisie, ignorance and superficiality of Limpman's method, which in bourgeois society seems as natural as the air we breathe. Finally, owing to the reinforcements of the nationalistic empiricism now being provided by the Stalinists in the name of Marx, this inexhaustible source of corruption celebrated the latest July 4th as follows. The fact that our country was able to rally from the unclear national policy of the dark days of division of the Manichaeism to play a tremendous part it has in the great anti-Schmittler war of liberation is in large measure due to the democratic content, which for 168 years, despite many vicissitudes, has continued to characterize their national existence. What are these but the historical methods and ideas of lumpenmen, dressed in a pink sweater? This deliberate and criminal falsification has a clear purpose. The political struggle of the proletariat in international relations now becomes a struggle as to whether, quote, our country, i.e. Roosevelt, will continue to play the role it has played, quote, for 168 years, i.e. in 1944, support Stalinist Russia. Under this potent but poisonous fertilizer, the advocacy of incentive pay on the non-strike pledge becoming the continuation of a great tradition of the Declaration of Independence, not only at home but abroad. Yet, in reality, the history of the United States, properly understood, is a clarion call to the masses of the people everywhere to raise the concepts of the nation to higher plane by inseminating it with the concept of class. Dialectically handling this history is a weapon to be used by and for the people and not against them. The method of investigation. Yay, I wasn't approved, everybody. Go figure. Not approved. There will still be states telling us communism is a world system. It's the world system. The method of investigation. 1. Marx has stated that, quote, as in the 18th century, the American War of Independence sounded the tocsin for the European middle class. So in the 19th century, the American Civil War sounded it for the European working class. All Marx's method is contained in that sentence, not America in general, but the class struggle in America, the American Revolution and the American Civil War, but Britain or France or Germany in general, but the progression up from the European middle class in the 18th century to the European proletariat in the 19th century. The method of dialectical materialism at one stroke clears its skirt from the hereditary stupidities, unintelligence of the bourgeois publicists and the criminal huckstering of his Stalinist hack. We today must bear in mind that logical class movement from the 18th to the 19th century, and by projecting it, disentangles from the complicated historical phenomenon, the class relations and international perspectives of the 20th. It is precisely this logical connection we wish to establish, and precisely this that the Stalinists wish to destroy, because it is this more than anything else that the American people need. Yeah. Are native people part of the working class? Do they work and earn wages? Would they also be proletariats too? Because they work? Yeah, I think some of them work and stuff like that. You know, are being alienated and disenfranchised and oppressed by the capitalist system. So yeah. This is no mere academic exercises. We can orient for the future only by comprehension of the present in the light of the past. This apparent truism with the bourgeoisie mere, quote, common sense or substantiationists for the Marxists was an entirely different significance, both logical and historical. Marx taught us that the very categories by which we distinguish the various phases of the social movement are fully developed and therefore fully comprehensible only in the maturity of the bourgeois society. Today, it can go no further. It is in the decay of bourgeois society as it falls to pieces that concept, centuries old, sheds all social and traditional disguises and stands naked. Then Jesse Jones, after Pearl Harbor, heard that stockpiles of rubber had been destroyed by fire in Boston and asked if they had been insured. Half, half the country laughed at him. The fetishism of commodities stood exposed as an idol of the marketplace. In every sphere of social knowledge, contemporary development reveals the past in truer perspectives, and show us our own great contradictions as merely the logical climax of embryonic movements maturing through the centuries. The history of the Bolshevism etches in sharper and clearer perspectives the apparent hair-splitting of the early Christians and the Puritans of thus gives historical discrimination of the conflicts of today in the light of tomorrow. Only the October Revolution could extend our knowledge of British and French revolutions, and the three of sequence together constitutes a new statue of liberty that eliminates the whole contemporary darkness. This extension of American power to the remotest reaches is a dramatic climax to the role this country has played in international relations, lightening up the past of the whole Western civilization, projecting its present contradictions into their future resolutions. Today, the American imperialism, the commodity, has reached its most grandiose historical manifestation. All people are entangled in the net of the world market. We have only to examine the historical development to see concretely pose the revolutionary socialist solution, which Marx instilled by logical abstraction. It is necessary to do this so as not to be misled by the apparent ignorance and the bewilderment of the great masses of the people. The masses do not learn history, they make it. More accurately, they learn it only when they are making it. Even Washington had little conception of what tocsin he was sounding, and Lincoln had less. So today, the American proletariat, as it went into the factories to protect the birth of the CIO, and now girds itself for the post-war struggle against unemployment, is unrewardedly preparing international and economic transformation of social realignments on a scale comparable only to the elevation of American capitalism to its position as dominant world power. This, for us, is the objective movement of history, which we attempt by precept and example subjectively to clearly and advance. Not forgetting, however, that the subjective movements, whatever its accidental chances, is in its totality the complement of objective necessity and cannot be separated from it. I'm going to look up this word, the first tocsin. I can't say it. What? What's a good starting point? Abolish all empires completely. Abolish all empires. Fuck empires. Fuck empires, everybody. Abolish all empires. Toxin. Okay, it's a toxin. Okay, the first toxin. Alarm bells of sound. Okay, cool. Toxin. See, I can't even read. What is this dude? Is this dude like a Nobel? Okay. The last quarter of the 18th century, bourgeois Europe needed to emancipate itself from the combination of feudalism and commercial capitalism, which we know is mercantilism. Yet, the protagonist of the new industrial capitalism in Britain, and as well as in France, had been nourished on the famous triangular trade of mercantilism, African America, and the Caribbeans. After the end of the 7 years of the 7-Year War in 1763, the up and coming industrial bourgeoisie began to find itself in conflict with the mercantilist commercials and political domination. Each class sought to solve its difficulties at the expense of the peripheries, the 13 colonies. But In the 13 colonies, the resulting economic and political crisis soon brought on to the political stage the artisans and mechanics of the towns. Says Beard, they broke out in rioting in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston. In fact, the agitation, contrary to the intent of the merchants and lawyers, got quite beyond the bounds of law and order. Well might Governor Morris remark. The heads of the mobility crew grew dangerous to the gentry, and how to keep them down is the question. The border areas, the farmers, checked in the first agitation against British, broke out into furious revolts against the American ruling class. A conservative historian sums up his research thus: but this Eastern ruling class was at no time deposed to sacrifice any of its privileges in order to bring the Western farmers wholeheartedly into the revolutionary movement. Instead, the aristocracy urged Americans to center their attention wholly upon British tyranny and not to seek to apply revolutionary principles to the conditions at home. Counter-revolutionary. I have no idea what you're talking about. The non-strike pledge, the incentive pay, have a long ancestry. When the victory was won, the bottom had been torn out of the triangular trade. The British industrial bourgeoisie came immediately into its own. The Treaty of Versailles, which ratified the independence of America, was signed in 1783. 1 year later, 1784, is the traditional date set as the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. In the surprisingly few years, the trade with America on the new basis revealed the old mercantilist prosperity of the conflation of the profits of evil. Not only in the internal affairs of Europe did the loss of America create a revolution. Colonial relations underwent a radical transformation. 1 year after the loss of America came the first of the Great India Bills, which mark the beginning of the change from the old-fashioned robbery and plunder of India to the more systematic economic exploitation based on the developing textile industry. 3 years after Versailles, Pitt personally asked Wilberforce to undertake the agitation for the abolition of the slave trade. This was accomplished in 1806 and marked the beginning of the new relationship between Great Britain and Africa. Mercantilists, Britain, for a century, the undying foe of colonial independence, in 1820 had become the champion of freedom in Latin American colonies, where George III had said of the struggle with the 13 colonies, blows will decide. Blows will decide. Canning, with his eye on British trade in Latin America, declared, "We have called a new world into existence to redress the balance of the old." George Washington might preach isolationism and non-intervention. The revolution had set in motion great class struggle in Europe and given a new direction to international trade and colonial relations. Today we can estimate the relative values of the Declaration of Independence and the essential political documents of the time. Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, had worked on it for 10 years when it appeared in 1776. He wrote that the present system of management, i.e. mercantilism, procured advantage only to a single order of men, i.e. one class, Great Britain, and Europe as well, derives nothing but loss from the dominion which she had assumed over her colonies. The problem was how to achieve the death of this system. In the opinion of this bourgeoisie, to propose that Britain give up all the authority over her colonies could be to propose such a measure as never was and never will be adopted by any nation in the world. The American revolutionary leaders for years had been in close contact with the radical opposition in Britain. But all these politicians were like Smith, unable to visualize a radical and complete break. It was the artisans, the mechanics, and farmers who started the ball a rolling and converted Smith's theories into realities. Thus, Washington isolationism was merely the appearance of things. Their essence was far different. We shall see this difference between the appearance and the essence constantly, repeating on an ever more extensive scale until it reaches truly gigantic proportions in the contradictions between the apparent power of Washington today and the underlying economic and social movement. I need something. Hold on a second, everybody. Oh. Oh. The second, oh my gosh, I already forgot how to say it. Toxin. There you go. The second toxin. What time is it? We're doing great. All right, second toxin. Technological discoveries are spermatozoa of social change. We're going to find out what that word means. Hopefully it'll let me hear it too.
Spermatozoa.
Spermatozoa, a mature, motile, male reproductive cell, gametes, responsible for fertilizing in female eggs and initiating the creation of new life. Okay.
Spermatozoa.
Spermatozoa of social change. The cotton gin not only created the historical patterns of American capitalists, it laid an indelible impression of European development as well. In 1847, Marx engaged in the congenial task of exposing the misuse of the Hegelian dialectic by Proudhon, took as one of his illustration of slavery. Without slavery, you have no cotton. Without cotton, you have no modern industry. It is slavery which has given their value to the colonies. It is the colonies which have created the commerce of the world. It is the commerce of the world which is the essential conditions of the great industries. Without slavery in North America, most progressive country would have been transformed into a patriarchal country, which it already is. Efface North America from the map of the world, and you would have the anarchy, the complete decadency of modern commerce and civilization. Cause slavery to disappear, and you will have an effaced America from the map of nations. Poverty of philosophy. Oh, that doesn't sound too good, does it? By 1847, however, this was the summation of an age which was dying. Its death was to change the social structures of America and signalize the coming of the age of the new force in Europe. It was 1 year before Marx's book. The British bourgeoisie won its final victory over the landlords by the abolition of the Corn Laws, which brought the cheap wheat of the New World into Britain and lowered the value of the laborer. The South had calculated all along that the loss of its cotton would inevitably bring intervention by the European powers, particularly Britain. It miscalculated the interest of the industrialists in cheap wheat from the wheat belt, which was one of the most powerful weapons in the North. But the role of cheap wheat was a testimony to the fact that the special claims of the textile industry, always the first to mature in a nascent capitalist development, have already been superseded by the interest of the bourgeoisie as a whole. The varied and expanded accumulation of capital had brought with it a varied and expanded proletariat. In 1848, proletariat appeared on the scene in France in the first proletarian revolution. Europe trembled, but in Washington, the White House, the government, and the people rejoiced at the downfall of the monarchy. The ruling class of Europe therefore hated the political system of America, which is scorn of aristocracy and monarchy its emphasis on equality, manhood suffrage, and popular government. But in the United States of 1848, forces were at work, converting the bourgeoisie from the ally to the foe of popular aspiration abroad. In 1850, a desperate attempt was made to compromise the difference between North and South, but the economic conflict was irrepressible. The fugitive slaves and the abolitionists would not let the question be forgotten for a moment. In 1858, economic crisis shook not only the United States, but the whole of the new, vastly expanded world market. From then on, the sequence of international events came thick and fast. Hey, y'all, what's up? First, between 1857 and 1859, a series of great strikes and class conflicts broke out all over Europe, including Britain included. And I have another appeal. Should allow like mine. Yeah, we're not having more coins, guys. Sorry. In 1860 came Lincoln's election. The South expected that the commercial capitalists of the North would as usual, capitulate. But independent farmers of the Northwest could not, for a moment, tolerate the idea of hostile power holding the mouths of the Mississippi, and they were among the chief supporters of Lincoln. But even more important, the victory of the Republican Party was due more than anything else to the support of labor. The neglect of this fact is one of the strangest features of the radical propaganda and agitation of in the United States. The labor, though not lovers of black people, was by 1960 conscious enough of the stake which free labor had in the struggle with slave labor. Thus, labor and the independent farmers were the most powerful forces in the North, while the general unrest and minor but repeated insurrection among the slaves completed the forces which pushed the unwilling rulers of the North and the South to the final settlements by arms. The mechanics, the artisans, the frontiersmen of 1776, and the black people who had fought with Russia, Washington had now developed into a powerful force on whom Lincoln had ultimately to depend for political support and military victory. But political activity, the concrete expression of social consciousness, though sometimes accelerated, sometimes slows down, must keep pace with social development. Even before 1848, the abolitionists not only led a incomparable agitation in the United States. Garrison and black people who had escaped from slavery placed the case of the slaves before vast numbers of European workers. They enrolled supporters by the hundreds of thousands. One black person alone enrolled 70,000 in Germany. When war actually began, the European ruling class were on the alert for the opportunity to intervene. Everything hinged on Britain. The British government was hesitant and hoped for the encouraging signal from the Lancashire cotton operatives, who were in the great distress over the sensation of cotton export from the South. The British textile operatives, however, denounced the intervention plans of the government, and what took place in Britain was a repeat on the lesser scale all over Europe. The British bourgeoisie was sneering at Lincoln's repeated declaration that the war was not a war for the abolition of slavery. The European workers shout across the ocean that it was, and called on Lincoln to say so. Lincoln with the North in great danger finally penned the Emancipation Proclamation to take effect on January 1st, 1863. The European proletariat celebrated a great victory. It came just in time, Marx tells us. Lincoln, labor, and slavery. Marx tells us that in April 1863, a monster meeting prevented Palmerston from declaring war against the United States when he was on the point of doing it. In 1861, the Tsar, fearful of rebellion from below and emancipated the serfs in 1862, had come had come the rebellion of the Polish people. A great international mass meeting took place in London in July 1863 on behalf of the Polish dependence. These two events, the American Civil War and the Polish Rebellion, brought to a conclusion a tentative negotiation long in progress, and on September 28, 1864, the First International was founded. On November 1st, the Executive Committee adopted the inaugural address by Marx. Nothing so contributed to the final consummation of the Civil War. At the beginning of that same November, Lincoln was re-elected president. Marx, on the Council of the International, initiated a series of mass meetings in Britain, protesting against the hostile attitude of the English ruling class and the government of the Union. On the 29th, Marx presented to the Council the address to Lincoln. The International became the terror of the European government. If in the 18th century, the American Revolution had initiated the struggle for bourgeois democracy, the Civil War had set on foot the movement which ended its first phase in the Paris Commune, the dictatorship of the proletariat. I know anarchism. Oh, never mind. I think this is Asian interlude, but they used the O word. It is a revolutionary. It was in the revolutionary period that the culmination. It was a revolutionary period that the culmination of previous trends and the beginning of new ones appear. That is why they are so important. Before we draw together the development historical tendencies which meet the colossal powers of the United States today, we have to note briefly the temporary but systematic Far East colonial ventures, which spurt during the revolutionary crisis of 1815 and 1860. In the critical decade of Northern industrial capitalists, unwilling to challenge seriously the combinations of plantation owners and financial and commercial interests, seriously sought an outlet in the Far East. The low tariffs imposed by the mainly agrarian Democratic Party brought European goods into the United States. And already in 1844, American merchants in Canton had extracted a commercial treaty from the Chinese, granting them, among other things, extraterritoriality 10 years later. Daniel Webster, Whig mouthpiece, sent Commodore Perry to open Japan chiefly as a port of call on the long journey to China. The hapless Japanese had seen what Britain had done and was doing to China, and knew, moreover, that British and Russian battleships were waiting to do likewise to Japan. They accepted the gentle coercion. American agents seized the Bono Islands and Formosa. The United States was already ankle deep in bloody mud in the imperialist scramble, but the class struggle at home checked the adventure. The Southern agrarians had their own ideal of imperialism, conquest of land of plantations in Cuba and Mexico. The Pacific Islands were far and could not be defended except by heavy expenditures of a navy. The neo-imperialists began a dog-in-the-manager policy, which they canonized as the defense of the territorial integrity of China. Imperialist enterprises draw political consequences. By 1850, European industries and European plunder had thrown the subsistence economies of India and China into disorder. In the tumultuous decade, the first of the great series of Asian revolution burst upon the world. The Taiping Rebellion against the Manchu dynasty began in 1850, and it has been described as a mass movement of the populace against the corruption, efficiency, and capitulation of Britain of the old Chinese ruling class. By 1856, this revolution was at its height. In 1857, followed what the British call the Indian Mutiny, but which I think this is people from. Oh wait, this might be indigenous people here. I'm not sure. All the first war independence. The American representatives in China played their part, side by side with the British and other imperialists, in suppressing the Taiping Rebellion. From that beginning to this day, American imperialism has never wavered in its unrelenting hostilities to the democratic aspirations of the Asian peoples. Even in the 70s, radical elements in Japan established a republic in one part of the island, and again in 1894, when Japanese parliament was leading popular hostilities against the throne of the bureaucracy. And the administration in Washington gave every assistance, military, politically, and diplomatic, to the save of the monarchy and the militarists. All right. The contemporary grandeur. As an industrial bourgeoisie felt the struggle of the proletariat at home, so they came at its enemy abroad. At the end of World War I, American food and diplomatic power had to be used to stifle the socialist revolution in Europe. Today, American capital has had to take upon itself the defense of European capital and the defense of European interests in Africa and the Far East against the incorporations of Germany and the new contender, Japan, hence its far-flung armies, navies, and air force. But this war has brought with it an unprecedented disintegration of capitalist societies in Europe and Asia. Never was there such a destruction, such misery, such barbarism, never such disillusionment by the masses of the people in every continent with the old order. American imperialism therefore becomes the chief bulwark of the capitalist system as a whole. At the same time, 10 years of the New Deal have shown the impossibilities of solving the Great Economic Depression. Therefore, the United States hopes to restore its own shattering prosperities by substituting its own imperialism for the imperialism of Britain and France, its allies. It even prepares to liberate India in the interests of the open door and the territorial integrity of India. The Gandhis and the Nares, however, seek the protection of this new patron to pacify the masses, satisfy their hatred of Japan and Britain, and divert them from social revolution. The United States is the friend and ally of every reactionary government and class in Latin America, except insofar as these, for the moment, assist the access. This, in 1944, is our country. The colossal power of American imperialism is the apex of the process that raised maturity and decline of the capitalist world market. The 18th century, our country, in the triumph of its industrial bourgeoisie, realized the great political potentialities of the European proletariat and moral enemies of the European bourgeoisie. Today, our country can release nothing, driven by the contradictions of its own capitalistic development and of capitalism as a whole, is now the enemy of hundreds of millions of people everywhere. The appearance of liberators of peoples is a necessary disguise for the essential reality of American imperialism, epitome of decadent capitalism, mobilized for the defense of pillage and property against the world crying to be free. The laws of dialectics are to be traced not in metaphysical abstractions, such as 168 years of our country, but in economic development and the rise, maturity, and decline of different social classes within the expansion of the construction of the capitalist world market. The greatest progressive force of the 18th century and the nationalism of our country is in the 20th century, the greatest of obstacles of social progress. In accordance with the fundamental dialectical law, the progressive nationalism of 18th century America is transformed into its opposite, the reactionary internationalism of American imperialism. The liberating isolationism of Washington is transformed into the reactionary interventionism of Roosevelt. The essence underlining each social order is exactly the opposite of its appearance on the surface. The power of Washington as a capital of the world rests on no sound foundation, except to those for whom the logical development of historical forces have ceased, or has never existed. The imperialist America grandeur is the mark of imperialist America doom. Imperial Washington, like imperial Rome, is destined to be cursed and execrated. Hold on, let me look at this word. We're doing good. I might stop here. Let me get this word real quick. Execrate. Execrated. To feel or express intense hatred, loathing, or to formally denounce something as evil. Extricated by the embittered millions. The liberating international traditions can and will have a new birth in this nation, but today, in accordance with historical logic, only in the service of American proletariat, consciously using the great American traditions of the past and its present economic powers as a pivotal arsenal in international socialism. Let me see here real quick. Let me see something real quick. Because I got 7 minutes. There we go. Okay. If this is 2 pages, maybe. Okay, yeah, we're reading the rest. Okay. Modern international society. The stage is set. There are unmistakable indications that there is rapidly rising a truly popular demand for the cleaning of the Aguan stable of modern international society, and that it will not admit defeat. The author of that is no Marxist, but a man who for years directed the international policies of American imperialism, Sumner Welles. But history has proven again and again since 1917 that the agrarian revolution on which hangs the salvation of India and of China and of Latin America can be achieved without the conscious aid of the working class in each country. In our compact world, successful revolts are in the area will sound the toxins for the center more violently than the American Revolution in the 18th and 19th century shook metropolitan Europe, and the social crises of America must bring into the scene the American proletariat. Yet it would be a grave error to mistake the 20th and the 19th century to believe that the American proletariat is dependent upon toxins from abroad to engage in relentless class struggle with American capital. Whatever may be accidental occasion, that struggle is rooted in the inability of American capital to solve the problem of the industrial reserve labor army. Significant actions of any kind by American proletariat will reverberate in every corner of the world. One world. Every Chinese knows that it is impossible to have great class struggle in China without provoking the interventions of the American imperialism. The whole tendency of the modern economy shows the foreign trade will be increasingly a transaction under the aegis of government. American imperialism cannot escape its entanglements in foreign class struggles, even if it would. Revolutionary movements anywhere can release only the international proletariat and the hundreds of millions dependent upon it. And that too is a law of the dialectic, proving the rightness of the organisms of transformational change. The American proletariat itself may view the tangled skein of world politics with faint interest or even without indifference. To judge the future of contemporary history by these subjective appraisals is to make an interpretable error. To forget that being determines consciousness, not vice versa. That are one world, the first series of prolonged struggles upon which the American proletariat embarks, with its own bourgeoisie, will rapidly educate it in the realities of international politics. This must be the theoretical basis of action. The masses who comprised the Sons of Liberty had little understanding of the fact that they were sounding toxins for the European middle class. Lincoln, the leader, did not even know that he would have to emancipate the slaves. Far less sound the toxins for the organization of the first Workers' International, the farmers, mechanics, and artisans, the workers and black slaves pursued strictly, immediately, the concrete aims of and made world history. The premise of the international proletarian organization are here. The individual productive units of earlier competitive capitalism found its political complement in bourgeois democracy, where individual units of the bourgeois fought out its collective problems. The maturity of capitalist production drove the proletariat to international organizations in the 19th century. In the 19th century, the size of the productive units had linked the national units of production so closely that imperialist war marked the final decline of capitalism. From the large-scale productive unit came the new political form of the future, the Soviets. For the Soviets are not merely organs of struggle, but the political framework of new society. To the Soviets, which constitutes an instructive rejection by the masses of the organs of bourgeois democracy, the bourgeoisie responded with the totalitarian state. The most glaring sign of the degradation of the role of the workers in Stalinist Russia is the destruction of the Soviets by the Constitution of 1936. Stalinist totalitarianism, the historical result of the first proletarian revolution, its growing collaboration with American imperialism, and mischievous powers of its satellites abroad, have disorientated those whose Marxism, based on emotion and superficial readings, reject the dialectic of history. They work for Stalinist Russia, American imperialism, back towards the possibilities of socialism. They see the absence of international organizations, the acquiescence of indifferences of the workers, the organizational power of the Stalinist corruption inside the working class, and draw the gloomiest prospects for international revolutionary action. Such was never the theory or practice of Marx. Let us end this theoretical study with one of his most mature, pregnant sayings. The international activity of the working class does not, by any means, depend on the existence of the International Working Men's Association. This was only the first attempt to create an essential organ for the activity, an attempt which, from the impulse it gave, is the abiding success that was no longer predictable in its first historical form after the fall of the Paris Commune. It was in this reasoned faith that Lenin and his band of Bolsheviks worked and created the Third International. We who have seen the determination of the contemporary masses to cleanse the Algerian stables and modern international society are not in any way dismayed by the power of Washington or of Moscow. In the contradictions of barbarism of the world economy, we see the soil from which, at whatever remove and through whatever corruption, from without and within, must ultimately rise the Fourth International, July 1944. We'll stop there on Chapter 13, The Revolution, Answer to the Black Problems in the United States. Hold on. Got to do this. 189. From 164 to 189. Pretty good. This will be great. Chapter 3. Ah, well, that was interesting. Lots to take in and stuff like that. That's for sure. But I'm going to... Go ahead. You can say something before I close it out? Yeah. Well, it add more to the history of things in the United States, so that's good. That's good. But anyways, being back for the last 3 days, I'm going to go ahead and call it. I appreciate everybody here. We'll start again tomorrow. Well, not start again. We'll keep reading tomorrow. So, all right. I'm just a little tired. That's why.